Towards the beginning of the 2019 anime film Weathering With You, the audience is introduced to the male protagonist, Morishima Hodaka, as he's sailing towards Tokyo aboard a passenger ferry. It's on this ferry that Hodaka meets Suga Keisuke, another important character in the movie, after enjoying some of the, well, let's just say unique weather phenomena that's central to the story of this film. Now, those of you who know me probably know by now that I kind of have a thing for ships. While this mostly exhibits itself in my interest in naval vessels, I do also like their civilian counterparts, even ones as humble as passenger ferries. As such, the ferry scenes in Weathering With You are, from a visual standpoint, some of my favorite moments in the entire movie. Shinkai Makoto and the animators at Comics Wave Films did a great job of bringing to life this utilitarian vessel in precise detail. Or perhaps I should say recreating, as the Weathering With You ferry, like so many other locations in Shinkai's movies, does actually exist in real life. Discovering the identity of this ferry is not particularly difficult. In fact, we see her name painted on her hull in the film itself, Salvia Maru. A quick search on Google confirms that this is indeed the ship seen in the film. Or, well, sort of. I'll get to that in a bit. Before I talk about Salvia Maru, it's worth providing a bit of background on the shipping line that she was a part of. Her original owner and operator was Tokai Kisen, a Japanese shipping company that dates back to 1889. Tokai Kisen has operated several passenger and freight routes throughout their long history, but by the 1970s they had come to focus primarily on service between Tokyo and the Izu Islands, a string of volcanic islands that extends down into the Pacific Ocean. To this day, Tokai Kisen operates regular service to 8 of the 9 populated islands in this chain. Given the remoteness of the Izu Islands, the service provided by these ferries is hugely important to both local residents and tourists alike. The original Salvia Maru was built by Naikai Zozen in Hiroshima Prefecture and launched in 1972, entering service as a passenger ferry the following year. She was named after salvia, a genus of plants that includes sage and rosemary, and this followed Tokai Kisen's practice of naming many of their ships after plants. We can see this in other names such as Satsuki Maru, Camellia Maru, and Sakura Maru. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Japanese ship naming practices, the suffix Maru is commonly attached to the civilian ship names. This is a tradition going back to at least the 16th century. Salvia Maru had a clean white paint scheme with a blue boot topping and the distinctive Tokai Kisen Company flag painted on her prow and wrapping around her funnel. This flag does bear a close resemblance to the flag of Norway, so much so that I remember briefly thinking that she was a Norwegian ship when watching Weathering With You for the first time. As ferries go, she was relatively large, with a length of 93 meters, beam of 14 meters, and a displacement of around 3,000 tons, and she could carry around 2,000 passengers at a cruising speed of about 16 to 17 knots. Now, the astute of you have probably noticed that the ship pictured on the screen does not really look like the ship seen in Weathering With You. And that's because it's not. This is a different ship. You see, there have actually been 3 Tokai Kisen ships with the name Salvia Maru. The one seen in the movie is the 2nd generation Salvia Maru. The 1st generation of this ship, the one which I've been talking about, would serve Tokai Kisen reliably all the way through 1992, upon when she was retired and sold to a company in Indonesia, where she would continue to operate as the Telaga Fitma until being sold for scrap in 2005. The retirement of Salvia Maru in early 1992 left a gap in Tokai Kisen's fleet, which would be filled at the end of the year when the line took delivery of the 2nd generation Salvia Maru. As a historical note, it seems that the 2nd generation ship was initially referred to as Salvia Maru II, but the 2 was soon dropped from its name. This new ship was built by the Mitsubishi Heavy Industries Shimonoseki shipyard and was launched in August of 1992. She had several differences from her predecessor and is easily identifiable as the ship seen in the movie Weathering with You. She was a substantially bigger ship, with a length of 120 meters, beam of 15 meters, and a displacement of nearly 5,000 tons. In spite of her increase in size, her passenger count remained at about the same, about 2,000. This is because the extra size was instead used to allow for more space for cargo. Whereas the original Salvia Maru had exclusively been a passenger ferry, her replacement was fitted with a distinctive crane which gave her the ability to load and unload shipping containers. Even though the same basic livery was carried over, the white base with the blue boot topping and the Tokai Kisen flag painted on the funnel and prow, the large crane makes it easy to tell that this was a new ship. Salvia Maru cruised at between 17 to 20 knots, and like her predecessor, she served routes connecting Tokyo and the surrounding areas to the Izu Islands. Salvia Maru was remodeled in the early 2000s after about a decade of service. Her passenger capacity was cut down to just 816, which allowed for improvement in the accommodations. Passengers purchasing a ticket on Salvia Maru could pick between a private cabin or an array of shared accommodations, including shared rooms with bunk beds and two distinctive types of second-class cabins, a Western one with airline-style reclining chairs, and a Japanese-style one with a large padded floor for resting. The ship also contained coin-operated showers, a restaurant, vending machines, and general seating areas. The choice of Salvia Maru for Weathering with You was a logical one. By the late 2010s, she was, after all, mainly operating along the Tokyo-Oshima-Kozushima route, with additional cruises around Tokyo Bay during the summer. Hodaka, as it turns out, happens to be from Kozushima. While the scenes aboard Salvia Maru make up a small percent of the total running time of the movie, we do actually get to see several of the aforementioned features of the ship. Hodaka appears to be staying in one of the Japanese-style cabins, for example. He gets to experience a rainstorm on the top of the ship, nearly going overboard in the process. And we also get a good look at the outdoor seating area, the restaurant seating area and vending machine, and even the ship's crane in action while docked in Tokyo. The unusual weather phenomenon in the film does rock the ship in a visually spectacular way, but doesn't really threaten it, which makes sense as the seas that Salvia Maru is designed to sail in can be very rough. After nearly 28 years of reliable service, Salvia Maru was retired on June 25th of 2020. She has since been sold to a company in Bangladesh where she operates as the regional cruise ship MV Bay 1. Just as the original Salvia Maru had been replaced by the second-generation ship of the same name, so was the second generation replaced by a third. The third and current Salvia Maru was built by Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, just like her predecessor, and thus retains many similar traits, most notably the large crane. The new Salvia Maru is actually slightly shorter than her predecessor, with a length of 118 meters, but she has a larger beam of 17 meters and a displacement of just over 6,000 tons. She can cruise at up to 20 knots and can carry up to 1,343 passengers and 38 shipping containers. Her designers place an emphasis on achieving greater efficiency, reducing noise and vibration, achieving lower maintenance costs, and improving turning performance when compared to the second-generation ship. While the second and third generation Salvia Maru share a similar profile, there are several ways to tell them apart. The clearest visual difference is the livery. The new Salvia Maru retains the blue and white scheme of her predecessors, but has a unique pattern designed by the artist Tokoro Asao. Besides that, the new ship lacks the Tokai Kisen flag on her bow, and she has a squared-off stern instead of a round one. Her overall design is almost identical to her fleetmate, the third-generation Tachibana Maru, which was launched in June 2014. there are quite a few videos of Salvia and Tachibana Maru on YouTube. I've included some links to these in the description of this video. I personally think the profiles of these ships are rather aesthetically pleasing. The large crane and the space at the front for freight gives them a lot of empty area in front of the superstructure, and it results in an appearance that is somewhat reminiscent of the ocean liners of old. Just like the second generation Salvia Maru, the third generation vessel offers a variety of passenger accommodations, including private cabins, shared rooms, Japanese-style cabins, and the airline-style reclining seats. She also features showers, vending machines, a restaurant, and general seating areas. Her interior design reflects her blue and white exterior quite nicely. Today, the Tokai Kisen fleet consists of Salvia Maru, Tachibana Maru, and a set of 4 high-speed hydrofoil jet ferries. Salvia Maru provides routine service from Tokyo to Kazushima, with stops along the way at Oshima, Toshima, Nijima, and Shikinejima, while her sister Tachibana Maru provides service from Tokyo to the more distant islands of Miyakijima, Mikurashima, and Hachijojima. While Salvia Maru has the shorter route, it's worth noting that her range actually extends quite a bit further out. Unlike her predecessors, she was designed to be capable of conducting service to Chichijima in the Ogasawara Islands, some 1,000 kilometers south of Tokyo. For context, Hachijojima is only about 287 kilometers south of Tokyo. The Ogasawara route is typically handled by the much larger Ogasawara Maru, but this extra capability means that Salvia Maru can take her place if need be. Returning to Weathering With You, an interesting thing to note is that the timeline of the movie doesn't quite match up with the real-world history of Salvia Maru. As mentioned before, the second generation Salvia Maru was retired from service in 2020, but in Weathering With You, she's still seen plying her route as late as 2024. The obvious explanation for this incongruity is that Weathering With You was made in the 2010s, before the third generation ship ever existed. The staff likely just went down to Salvia Maru, took a bunch of pictures, and used that to recreate her in their movie. That being said, there is a plausible in-universe explanation for the continued service of the ship. Given the extreme weathering patterns endemic to Japan in Weathering With You, it's quite easy to believe that ferries would have been kept in service instead of being sold off, as they could be very useful for things such as emergency evacuations and relief efforts. Perhaps the third generation Salvia Maru even exists in this fictional world, sailing for Tokai Kisen under a different name alongside her real-life predecessor. In any case, the ships of the Salvia Maru lineage have served Tokyo and the Izu Islands reliably for half a century, and look set to do so for the foreseeable future. Given this legacy, it's certainly quite nice to see one of them immortalized on the silver screen.